Hey guys, Jason here, back with part 2 of my OCG Retrospective. In the last video, I covered the earliest days of the game and how the meta evolved from DMs 1 to 5. Lots and lots of water, Crystal Paladin was the boss of choice throughout the era, and Astral Reef made its presence felt like nobody's business. In the classic block, Astral Reef aside, I feel like there weren't that many cards which pushed the envelope, so the meta was pretty much the same with the release of each new expansion. This next block of sets, the Invincible block, sees power levels increase, which gave rise to more variety, for better or for worse. The case of DM6 was interesting because it brought perpetual fan-favorite Bolmeteus to the world, but I'm under the impression that it wasn't until DM7 that players figured out how to best use him. Once they did though, turbo-style Bolmeteus decks would run wild. Before we get started, I need to disclose that I didn't come up with these lists myself. They were taken from the Japanese YouTuber Sasabo, links in the description. Sasabo has done retrospective and gameplay videos for the first few sets, which span the English releases. He also made a lot of Duel Masters Plays videos, or rather I should say makes a lot of Duel Masters Plays videos, which Andrew enjoys, so check out his channel if you have a moment. Our first DM6 deck, some of you might be glad to know, is our last Water Nature Beatdown deck. Our Liquid People lineup is made up of 1 Guard, 2 Hulkus, 2 Surfers, and 2 Paladin. For draw, we've got 3 Cyberbrain and a 4/4 Reef Engine. I find it funny that the only new card this deck uses is Steam Star, a vanilla card. You'd think it would be something a little more exciting, but no, players just needed something cheaper than Candy Drop to evolve into Astral Reef. Last of the Waters, 3 Emerald, who as you can see, we have plenty of targets for. Darkness makes a comeback here with 3 Terrapit and 3 Lost Soul. I very much like the addition of Lost Soul here because 1, it's Lost Soul, and 2, I feel like there's enough mana ramp to support it. In comparison to the Paladin decks from the last video, some of the trigs were reduced from 4 to 3 to make space. For TCG translation, swap out the Cyberbrains and Reef Engine for spell-based draw, or more Liquid People, or the Merfolk engine, etc, etc. We've been over this before. This next deck is one that was surprising to me. It's an actual deck-out deck. We get a nice break from Astral Reef and Crystal Paladin with a water section comprised of 3 Cyberbrain, 3 Mystic Dreamscape, a new card which costs 4 mana and lets you return up to 3 cards from mana to hand, so like a triple Flood Valve, and 3 Thrash Crawler, who also gets a card out of mana. I'm sure you can sense the engine of this deck is going to be wild. There's some crazy mana ramps, so much so that we're basically treating our mana zone like a second hand. For Darkness, 4 Terrapit, 3 Lost Soul, established picks at this point, and 3 Hellslash. Hellslash was a new release at this point, and at a big cost of 8, lets you search through your opponent's deck and discard 3 cards. In case this card is unfamiliar to you, it's because we never got it. Instead, we got a watered down version in Future Slash, which costs 1 less, but also mills 1 less card. I feel like these cards always get mixed reactions, because on one hand, they don't impact the board or directly affect your opponent's card advantage. However, gaining information on your opponent's deck is an advantage one shouldn't underestimate. Milling 3 cards out of a 40 card deck in a fast format is also no joke. I actually appreciate the concept of these sorts of cards in theory because it's really like you're paying forward. For instance, instead of spending a combined 18 mana on 3 Terrapits to get rid of 3 boss monsters, you can just pay 8 to get rid of them before they end up being a problem. I get that it's not that simple because your opponent has to pay to summon the card, there's a game of reactions, etc, etc, but the idea is still very interesting to me. Moving on, the Fire lineup contains 4 Crimson Hammer, 2 Cutthroat Skyterror, and 4 Burst Shot. Crimson Hammer is a curious pick because Phantom Dragon's Flame came out this set, but maybe the extra cost wasn't worth the shield trigger status. Anyway, since the aim of the deck is to deck the opponent, we're just trying to efficiently get rid of opposing creatures. Aside from Crimson Hammer's decent cost, I imagine Burst Shot being a shield trigger comes in clutch. Cutthroat, another new card, is also a neat addition. Like Pyro, he's a speed attacker that returns to your hand at the end of the turn, except he cannot attack people. I think he's a pretty efficient means of getting rid of Crystal Paladin and Astral Reef thanks to his respectable 5k power. And at last, we have the other half of the engine. The water section is getting us cards out of the mana zone, which means nature, a lot of which happen to be new cards by the way, is getting the cards in. For mana acceleration, we have 4 Faerie Life, Bronze Arm and Spellform, and 2 Mystic Treasure Chest, which at the cost of 3 lets us search the deck for a non-nature card to put in mana. The deck has 4 civs, so Treasure Chest can activate a lot of hard casts. I suppose you can also use it as a complex way to search cards when combined with Thrash or Dreamscape. 3 copies of Bliss Totem Avatar of Luck, who I believe is the only tap ability card will feature in this series. 6 mana 5k tap ability, put 3 cards from your graveyard in your mana. You get some mean acceleration there, and when combined with Thrash or Dreamscape is a way to reuse Hellslash. To finish off 2 mana Nexus, which Bliss Totem and Treasure Chest have acceptable synergy with, you can cast Treasure Chest or tap Bliss Totem to grab a shield trigger and play Nexus later to put it in shields, or just play like you normally would. It's a nature staple at this point. It's an easy deck to recreate in the TCG, just replace Hell Slash with Future Slash since literally everything else is available. DM7 is the time Bolmeteus' fortunes would turn around. I correlate the use of Bolmeteus to Apocalypse Vise, which seems to have been the board clear he needed. A lot of TCG players are well acquainted with Searing Wave, which was released all the way back in DM3. I hypothesized the reason Searing Wave never caught on was because it couldn't kill the ever-prevalent Astral Reef. Sasabo only covered one deck for DM7, but it's brilliant. Starting things off with water, we've got 2 Surfer, 4 Cyberbrain, a 4/2/4 Reef Engine, and 2 Corile. All very self-explanatory at this point. 3 Terrapit and 3 Lost Soul for Darkness, saw those coming too. And then 3 Apocalypse Vise, a new card at the time and formidable board clear, plus 3 Bronze Arms, 4 Poisonous Mushroom, and 4 Mulch Chargers, also new for that sweet mana acceleration. You might consider Mulch Charger the MVP of the deck. Mulch Charger costs 3 mana, and its effect is to put one of your creatures into your mana zone. So the ideal curve of this deck is, while charging every turn, to open with Marine Flower, evolve into Reef the following turn, and Mulch Charger the next turn. With a charge each turn, you eventually hit 7 mana by turn 4, which sets up Lost Soul or one of your bosses, or basically whatever you want. The last 2 slots are for your finisher, either Bolmeteus or Cursed Totem. Yep, Cursed Totem. We never got this guy, but I think it's for the better. He blocks your opponent's shield triggers, but unlike our nerfed version in Cryptic, does not have to be tapped. Recreation in the TCG here is hard to comment on without testing. As per usual, you could swap out the Reef engine for the Merfolk engine or lower maintenance draw, like Energy Stream and Aqua Hulkus, who is noticeably missing. For nature, you might be able to replace Mulch Charger with Faerie Life because Mulch Charger loses a lot of potency without Astral Reef. Not only do you give up the insane mana boost from Mulch Charging Reef, but there also aren't many good single targets for a turn 3 Mulch in the current list anyway. If you want to be thorough, I'd recommend experimenting with different combinations of Faerie Life, Poisonous Mushroom, and Mulch Charger alongside both Merfolk and low maintenance draw. The objective is to map out different timings like the impact of hitting Mulch on turn 4 or 5 and how that affects the strategy, or how consistently you can pull off a turn 4 or 5 Merfolk. Thinking about Mulch, casting it on turn 4 seems like a value play, so my knee-jerk reaction is to start testing Mulch alongside Hulkus first. But yeah, play around with it. It's a really cool deck I'd love to try for myself. I just need to get my hands on some Mulch Chargers first. Bolmeteus continued his momentum throughout DM8, so now we get him in 2 varieties. The first is a turbo-style deck similar to what we just covered. To start, 2 Hulkus, 2 Surfer, 4 Cyberbrain, and a 4/2/4 Reef Engine. You'll notice that Steamstar has been replaced by Grape Globbo, who came out in DM8. 2 mana 1k, when summoned, Globbo lets you look at your opponent's hand. Not super amazing, it's just here as cheap bait for Astral Reef, but at least it does something. The dark lineup is slightly thinner with only 2 Terrapits and 3 Lost Soul. I think this is the first time I've seen a list with more Lost Souls than Terrapits, but whatever. For fire, our 1 Bolmeteus and 3 Apocalypse Vise are joined by 2 Magma Dragon Jagalzor. Jagalzor is a 6 mana 6k double breaker with Turbo Rush, a mechanic introduced this set. When one of your other creatures breaks a shield, Turbo Rush activates, and Jagalzor's Turbo Rush gives all of your guys speed attacker. Andrew and I like this card a lot and agree it had potential we hadn't recognized, so I'm happy to see it playing a role here. For mana acceleration, we're looking at 3 Mushrooms, 2 Bronze Arms, and 4 Mulch Chargers for the combo. Last nature card, 2 Cursed Totems, so in this deck we have 3 True Finishers supported by 2 Jagalzors. Jagalzor has phenomenal synergy with Cursed Totem because when you have one of the 2 out, you can summon the other, break with something to activate Turbo Rush, and use Jagalzor and Cursed Totem to take out the rest of the shields with trigs off. Jagalzor can synergize with Bolmeteus too, in the sense you can make a calculated risk to break something while Jagalzor is out to give Bolmeteus speed attacker, but the strategy is stronger with Totem. For a TCG version, you can rewind the video because the perspective changes would be the same as for what we just covered. The second list is of the control variety. Thin water section of just 4 Cyberbrain and 2 Thrash Crawler. For darkness, 4 Terrapit, 3 Lost Soul, and 3 Hellslash, just darkness cards doing darkness things, resource deprivation, etc, etc. The fire section of this list is the thickest we'll see all series, with 4 Crimson Hammer, 3 Volcano Charger, 3 Burst Shot, 3 Apocalypse Vise, and 2 Bolmeteus. Volcano Charger made its debut this set as a more expensive but mana accelerating Crimson Hammer, which also happens to be reusable with Thrash Crawler. So the Hammers and Volcano are here for early creature kill, and the other spells for board clear. The nature section of this deck is my favorite part. Some of you guys will know I'm a big fan of Essence Elf, and here we have 3 copies. We've also got 4 Faerie Life and 2 Mana Nexus. The synergy between nature and the rest of the deck is actually through the roof. A turn 2 Essence Elf or Faerie Life opens the door to a turn 3 Volcano Charger or Cyberbrain, and believe me, playing these cards a turn earlier makes them loads better. Elf and Faerie Life also make it easier to cast big spells like Lost Soul and Hellslash. My guess is we don't bother with the reefs here because we are choosing to have nature fuel the deck instead, but we also want to manage our pace because aside from Bolmeteus, we can use Deck Out as an alternate win condition. Recreation here is easy, Cyberbrain for Brain Serum and Hellslash for Future Slash. To recap on how the meta has evolved thus far, Crystal Paladin has been the guy to play since his release in DM2. 2 sets later, Astral Reef came out and claimed the title of most important evolution creature. Come DM7, Paladin would eventually fall out of favor with the emergence of shield trigger bypassers Bolmeteus and Cursed Totem. At this point, some observant viewers might be wondering where Aquan fits into all this. After all, it's been several sets since his debut in DM4. Fear not, for his time is now. See, Aquan is yet another one of those bonkers cards that never made its way to the West. 4 mana, 2k power, when he hits the field, reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, put all light and darkness cards into your hand, and dump the rest. If that effect sounds familiar, it's because we have him in DMP, but he only reveals 3, and we also got a weakened version in the TCG in Marinomancer, who costs 1 more and reveals 2 less cards. So if you think drawing 3 cards for 4 or 5 mana is insane, try drawing 4 or 5. With an effect as good as this, living up to his potential wasn't a matter of if, but when. The release of DM9 gave him this very opportunity by giving him a worthy partner in Petrova. So we're getting Aquan in 2 flavors. I think these decks are awesome because they are built as control decks in that you've got a lot of cards that aim to control the hand and field, but they're also inherently aggressive. The first flavor pairs Aquan with Guardians. It's a thick lineup made up of 4 Lauragiga, 2 Solgala, 3 Jilwarka, newly released, 2 Mysterious, and Evolution's Larbagear, which we have 2 of, and Glena, Vuele, also newly released with a count of 3. As you can gather, the strategy is to flood the board with Guardians, summon Petrova to power them up, and keep swinging. The Uragiga is as cheap as Evo Bait gets, so we have 4, 2 Solgala, 2 mana 1k blocker, but gets an extra 3k for the turn when a spell is cast. It's cheap Evo Bait, but also notable in being able to trade with Astral Reef if the effect is triggered, though I suppose Larbagear could also just kill it. 3 Jilwarka, 3 mana 2k blocker whose effect lets you tap 2 opposing creatures when it is destroyed. I think when this card is in the right deck, it's amazing. Given the right circumstances, Jilwarka can create these situations where the opponent is damned if they do, but damned if they don't. Like if they destroy it, it basically ends their turn, but if they don't, you still have a blocker and one that can evolve. I recently lost a game to this card on DMP, so don't sleep on it. Mysterious draws cards, can evolve, so why not? Petrova also makes it harder to kill, so it's way better. Going back to Larbagear, it came out in the second set, so a long time ago. When summoned, it taps all opposing blockers. It's kinda like Crystal Paladin, but we don't need Hulkus for draw because we have Aquan. The big bad boss of the deck is Glena, Vuele the Hypnotic. It's a Guardian evolution that costs 5 but has a massive 8500 power and double breaker. Its effect lets you add the top card of your deck to your shields when your opponent uses a trig. I was never super impressed with this effect and always thought it just found its way into decks because it had a big body, but its success in the OCG and DMP might make me rethink that. I suppose the effect can come in clutch when you're trying to close out the game, you break into a trig that prevents you from winning that turn, but the extra shield prevents your opponent from winning on their turn. The other light cards are 3 Petrova and 3 Holiaw, the latter of which is self-explanatory. Petrova is a 5 mana creature with 3500 power and a lot of card text. Basically, pick a race and for as long as Petrova's out, your creatures of that race get an extra 4k power. Petrova also cannot be targeted by effects, so stuff like Terrapit and Aquasurfer can't be used to remove her. I can't believe I never thought about trying Petrova out in Marino Control, but there you go. For water, for Aquan, of course, he's the engine of the deck and draws lots of cards. Speaking of drawing cards, there's also a single copy of Cyberbrain, which I believe was restricted to 1 at around this time. 2 Coral and 1 Surfer for spot removal. I wonder why it was split and not just 3 of either, but we all know why both are good. For darkness, we've got 3 Terrapit, 4 oh hello Skeleton Vise, and a single copy of Lost Soul. Skeleton Vise is the OCG equivalent of Cranium Clamp. Coming out in the 8th set, Skeleton Vise, like Cranium Clamp, forces your opponent to discard 2 cards, but does so at random. Cranium Clamp's nerf at least has the decency to let the opponent choose what to discard, am I right? Last but certainly not least, we have 2 Photoside Lord of the Wastes. No, I am not trolling. Well, 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 Jason, you said demon commands were bad. Look who has egg on their face now. So Photoside's a 5 mana 9k creature who, despite not being able to attack people, can attack untapped light creatures. He can get over small guardians with a single Petrova buff, the big guys without a Petrova buff, and Petrova herself. 2 copies were probably necessary given how heavy the Petrova meta was at the time. The second flavor pairs Aquan with Initiates. For the Initiates, we have 4 Sarius, 2 Ballas, 4 Miel, and 3 Crazed Valkyrie. Sarius is a 2 mana 3k blocker who acts as cheap bait, but can also block, obviously. 2 Ballas, a 2 mana vanilla initiate only intended to serve as cheap evo bait for Crazed Valkyrie. 4 Miel, a card we overlooked for this kind of deck, who, when summoned, taps a creature. It's like Colon, except rather than being a trig, it can evolve. It's great for controlling the opponent's board because Sarius can run over most early game creatures on its own, and most things in general after a Petrova boost. You'll notice that Magus is missing here. I suspect his draw effect is unnecessary when compared to Aquan and Cyberbrain, and Evo Bait with a cost of 4 is just too expensive. 3 Petrova and 3 Holiol like the other list, and a single copy of Misrius for that extra draw? I suppose we don't need as many copies since we can't evolve Misrius anyway, and would rather summon Initiates. The rest of the deck is near identical to the list we just went over, exact same water section and a very similar darkness section, except less patchy. 4 Terror Pits, 4 Skeleton Vise, 2 Lost Soul, and 2 Photoside. The other list ran more Guardians than this list runs Initiates, so that's where the extra space comes from. For the TCG transition, the most obvious changes would be to bring in Marinomancer for Aquan, your favorite draw spell or Crystal Memory for Cyberbrain, and Cranium Clamp for Skeleton Vise. However, I have to point out that Marinomancer is a lot worse than Aquan. Not only does Aquan reveal more cards, thereby making it easier to find Petrova, but he also curves perfectly into her. Marino and Petrova cost the same, so at best Petrova is likely coming out on turns 5 or 6. With this in mind, we can probably cut down on Ballas and Miel in the Initiate version, so Magus can come back to give more consistent draw. I also think Photoside's inclusion is directly as a result of the Petrova-centric metagame, so if light-based decks aren't a big issue in your circle, you could maybe get away with replacing him with some more spot removal or even Slash Chargers to increase your chances of summoning Petrova or Marino on turn 4. And yeah, that's the video. Next time we're going to take a look at the Eternal block, which spans DMs 10 to 13, where Bombazar and Aquan engage in an arms race. The game at this point has caught up with, and in the case of DM 13, exceeded what we have in the TCG. There are a couple of what I consider to be underutilized strategies, and I can't wait to show them to you guys. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys later.